Hello, family, and welcome back to the wonderful study of the book of Galatians. I hope it's been a blessing to you and it has brought some freedom to your life and some more encouragement in your walk with the Lord. Now, today I'm starting again a two-part teaching, and this time the subject is bondage. Now, the reason for this is we have been talking about sonship and being one with Christ and all of that, but last session we looked at the appointed time when this Christ came, when God sent his son to actually set us free from this bondage, those who were under bondage, to release them from that bondage. But what bondage? That's the question. Now, in the book of Galatians, right after this verse, we read that it was to release or redeem those who were under the law. Okay, so one understanding is to be under the law, but we as Gentiles, I've been saying this a few times in this series, we really never had a law. We were not Jews. We had not received any law from the Lord. We had not received the Ten Commandments. We didn't have any of those things. We were basically born into either another religion or even without any religion. But what is this bondage, therefore, that we have been released from, or even we are experiencing that in a greater level? Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to show you a few verses from other books, especially in the book of Hebrews and in the book of John, to see the context of bondage. Now, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14 and 15 tells us this about Jesus, that says, "Inasmuch as then the children had partaken of the flesh and blood, he likewise shared in the same," meaning he also became flesh and blood. Remember, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. So he also shared in the same, meaning shared in flesh and blood. And he says the purpose was that he may destroy him who had the power of death, that is the devil. Now, the word destroy means to make of no effect. It's not destruction, to make of no effect. So he says the fact that he came in flesh and blood was that through death, in that flesh and blood, he could make the power of death of no effect. Okay, that means its presence would have no effect on you. All right, so why is that important? Because verse 15 right after that tells us that this was to release those who through the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. That's the word that we're looking at, bondage. They were subject to bondage. That means they could be at any moment put in another bondage, another bondage, another level of bondage. So they were always subject to bondage. And it says this was through the fear of death. Okay, through the fear of death. So they were subject to bondage. But it says this Jesus came in, he came in flesh and blood. He became like us. He stepped into the physical realm, and this was prophesied, or I'm going to say this, if you go a few verses even before that in the book of Hebrews, we read something about Jesus. And it is to this extent that it says, he is a man to whom all things are under his feet now. All right. So now we're talking about us being subject to bondage, but we're looking at Jesus, everything being under his feet. But he didn't start that way. And I'm going to show you. And this is how he makes the power of death of no effect, and he releases us from the fear of death also. Okay, pay attention to this. Hebrews 2 verse 6. I'm going to start from verse 6 so you see the context. It says, "But one testified in a certain place, saying, What is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you take care of him? You have made him a little lower than the angels." Okay, we are getting into what does it mean to be subject to bondage. You made him a little lower than the angels, Okay, let me put this on the screen. So, made him a little lower than the angels. But then it says, you have crowned him with glory and honor. So we have crowned with glory and honor. And then after that we read, and set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. Okay, all things in subjection under his feet. I'm going to put under him. All right, so you made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor. So this is therefore the first step. This is the second step. This is the third step. Okay, now we're talking about those who were in all their lifetime subject to bondage. I said this is in verse 15. Okay, so therefore we are talking about a group of people, which is literally all humanity, and they were subject to bondage. And about them, we read that they had partaken of the flesh and blood. So they were flesh and blood. Okay, so this is us. They were flesh and blood. Now, look at what we read in verse. Okay, so look at number 1 here. Number 1 says, he made him a little lower than the angels, and then he put all things in subjection under him. That means in this state of being lower than the angels, he was subject to bondage. Why? Because he also partook of the flesh and blood. All right? So this is what I'm trying to say. Being subject to bondage doesn't mean that you are in bondage. That means you're subject to bondage. You are liable to bondage. It's like saying that somebody is mortal. That doesn't mean that they are dead. That means they are subject to death, that they can die. So we're talking about now Jesus, who became flesh and blood. Why? Because we were flesh and blood, and this is that story that we are looking at. He was flesh and blood. He came as flesh and blood. Why? Because he's doing something. Okay, in flesh and blood, he came to do something. Now, I'm going to show you this in the book of John, but before that, let me end with verse 8. So you have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in that he put all in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. So he says when God actually puts everything under his feet, there is nothing that is not included in this. Everything is in subjection. But now we do not yet see all things put under him. What is the him here? It's the man of verse 6, that it says there is a man, you're mindful of him, you take care of him, but you made him a little lower than the angels. Okay, so he says now we do not see everything under subjection of men, but this is the thing. Verse 9, but we see Jesus, okay, one man who fulfilled this story, who was made a little lower than the angel. See, number 1, for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor. Number 2, and that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. Okay, so he says, when this story happened, when he was made a little lower than the angel, he actually tasted death. Okay, he tasted death for everyone. Who are these everyone? Those who were made in flesh and blood. Okay, so what does it mean that he tasted death? Well, that means that he went through what we go through, but then he went through something else that no human beings had ever gone through, and that is resurrection life without any effect of death. So he says he tasted this death, but also he was raised, just as this was for, he tasted death for everyone. He also was raised, I'm gonna change the direction. He was raised for all who were flesh and blood. Now, this is that concept that we looked at, baptism. We were baptized into Christ, which was baptism into his death, and then you have put on Christ. Okay, so now I'm going to say something here and I'm going to show you. Through his baptism into his, our baptism into his death, something happens. Here he destroys lies. And through the putting on of Christ or resurrection, he reveals the truth. Okay, this two-step. So, death and life. One deals with lies, one deals with the truth. Now, we said that he came to release those who were subject to bondage. Therefore, what is he really doing? This is the bondage that we are talking about. This one. The lies. I'm going to show you this. Let's quickly go to the book of book of John. We were in Hebrews. Look at the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John is amazing. Jesus has been basically teaching them so many good things in chapter 6 and 7, and also the beginning of chapter 8. For example, in 6 and 7, it was all about bread of his body and the wine of his blood, that if anyone eats of his flesh, he shall never taste death, he shall never hunger. If anyone drinks of his blood, shall never thirst, so hunger, thirst, but you will be satisfied. And he says that you will have life, and he who believes in me shall never taste death. Okay, so these are amazing truths that he has been talking about. And those who were around him, the Jews, they constantly rejected. In fact, in chapter 7 says they began to leave him one by one. Not only the Jews that were the people that were not that close to him, but then even he says the disciples began to leave him. So he was speaking the truth, and they're leaving one after the other. Why? They are okay, I'm going to get to the why. But they are not hearing the truth. Then he turns even to the 12. I mean, the closest, the most inner circle of his disciples. And he says, do you want to also go? So that means it came to that point that he was speaking and people left one by one. So he was basically left and his disciples. And then he says he turned to those who believed. Okay, and he said this. This is in John chapter 8, verse 31. So some believed, okay? And he says this has come after your believing. And this is amazing. We don't hear this often. In verse 31, it says, then Jesus said to those Jews who believed him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Okay. So he says he said this to those who believed. That, okay guys, this is not over. It's not like you are free. No, you are full of something. And he says, he doesn't say what they are full of. He says, after this, you will know the truth. What does that mean? That they are full of lies. That what they know and they believe are lies. Okay, and it says, but you have believed me, and from now on you will begin to hear my words, and my word is the truth. You will know the truth that I speak, and then what you had believed will begin to be removed. Now look at what he says after this. Verse 33, they answered him, we are Abraham's seed, or Abraham's descendants, and have never been in bondage to anyone. We have never been in bondage to anyone. That's the word, bondage. Okay, the topic is bondage. Galatians chapter 4, he came to release those who were in bondage. Hebrews chapter 2 said we were in subject to bondage. We were in flesh and blood, and Jesus came to actually set us free from this. So they say we are not you have never been in bondage to anyone. And Jesus is not talking about being in bondage to anyone. He's talking about being in bondage to something. Now, look at this. How, and then they say, how can you say you will be made free and not be in bondage anymore? Jesus answered them, most assuredly, I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin. Whoever commits sin is a slave of sin. Okay, this is amazing. When I come to you and I say, you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, what are you really being made free from? The lies. But what we are reading here in Jesus' words is that he who sins is a slave of sin. Okay, if they had believed a lie and Jesus came to set them free by giving them the truth that they can come to know and be made free from the lies, then what is sin in the context? It's believing a lie. Once again, sin is believing a lie. Now, we know that Romans chapter, okay, I need to put this on the screen, otherwise there would be too much and hard to follow all these things. So I said sin is believing a lie. How did we get to here? How did we come to this understanding? Because he said whoever sins is a slave of sin. The context was bondage. So he says you are in bondage of sin. And anyone that is in bondage needs to be made free. But he says the truth will make you free. So the truth doesn't make you free from sin. The truth makes you free from a lie. Therefore, the sin that Jesus is talking about must be believing a lie. Now, what lie he is talking about, I'm going to be talking about that. But let's first establish this, that we are talking about believing a lie. And remember, Jesus came to destroy the lies. So look at verse 35. And this is one of, I don't know what to say, techniques or ways of studying the Bible, that a tip that I can give you. Most often, you don't need to go somewhere else to find the answer. The next verse contains the answer you're looking for. If you just pay attention, the next verse tells us what is this sin and what was the believing, the lie that they had believed. Look at verse 35. So remember, verse 34 said, if you commit sin, you are a slave of sin. Verse 35, and a slave does not abide in the house forever. Wow. A slave does not abide in the house forever. Whose house, first of all, what is the word abiding? Is to remain, to dwell in a place. And in chapter 14 of the same book, John, Jesus turns to Peter and he says, in my Father's house, there are many mansions, which the word is many remaining places, dwelling places, in my Father's house. So what house are we talking about here? That he says a slave does not abide in the house. It's the house of the Father. So he says, a slave, there are no slaves in Father's house. But what are in Father's house? Next one, a son abides forever. So slaves do not remain in the house of the Father, but sons do, and they do forever. Okay, so if now we are talking about slaves and sons, now let me put this here. If we are talking about slaves versus sons, and we said sin was believing a lie, and that makes you a slave. Believing a lie makes you slave of this sin. Okay, then what is this lie? It has to do with this, to be a son. That means you do not believe your sonship. Okay, so now I'm gonna therefore put this here. If we want to deal with this lie and change it from believing a lie, it has to be believing a truth, and the truth is sonship. So Jesus is trying to teach them sonship constantly. That is what he has been trying to do in the book of John. In fact, when you get to chapter 14, at some point he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And this has created so much debate between Christians and other religions in the world, saying that no, Jesus is the only way. Jesus is the only way. If you don't believe Jesus, then you're going to go to hell. And that is not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about sonship. He says, except through sonship, no one comes to the Father. Okay, you can't come to the Father as a slave. He said a slave does not abide in the house, sons do. And he says, I'm a son. I have modeled for you sonship. I have shown you what a son looks like. I've shown you what a son believes. I've shown you what a son desires. I've been showing to you what the Father thinks of the Son. I've been showing you these things, and this is the way. So follow me. Where I go, you shall be also. Okay, I'm going to the Father, and you will be in the Father. There are many dwelling places in his house. You will be with me in the Father. You and I in the Father. I mean, that language is there. So I'm the way, the truth, and the life speaks of sonship. I'm the way to you. I'm the way to the Father for you. That means you come through sonship to the Father. Okay. So what was the believing of a lie? What's the sin that mankind has committed from the beginning? Not believing what God says about them. Not believing the truth that God says about them. In fact, don't we know about the book of Romans and chapter 5 that it says there is one sin that came into the world, and that was through Adam? And when you look at the context of that story of Adam and Eve in the garden, what was the only thing that they did? They didn't they didn't commit adultery. They didn't show any sign of hatred or jealousy. They didn't, I don't know, anything that you can think of as sin. They didn't do any of those acts. There was only one thing that they did. They ate from a tree. Now let me show you what eating of a tree means. Jesus explains this in John chapter 6. He says, he who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Okay, so we are talking about an eating and drinking. And he says this is about coming to me and believing me. Okay, so what was, if Adam ate from a wrong tree, that means he went to another tree and he went to another person and he believed the lie that he heard. Okay, so the sin of Adam was believing a lie. All right? Okay, so now I'm going to take you to Romans chapter 1 so you can clearly see this. Look at Romans chapter 1. Paul says in verse 16 onwards that there is something called the gospel, the good news, and he has come to preach this to all the Gentiles, meaning all nations. And it says it's the power of God to salvation. It sets you free. It removes all the lies, and you experience that. And he says, I'm not ashamed of this gospel. It's the power of God, okay? And he says, but verse 18, Romans chapter 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Okay, see, there is one thing that he is concerned about. First of all, the wrath of God. I've said this, multiple times. The wrath of God is not against man. The wrath of God is against ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Okay, that fire, therefore, is not against man, it's against the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Now, what is their unrighteousness and ungodliness? He says they are suppressing the truth. That means they're believing a lie. They're covering up the truth. Now, what was the truth? I mean, I've shown you the truth was sonship, but let me show you in the context of even the book of Romans, because by the mouth of 2 and 3, a word shall be established. So you're not anymore, wandering around saying, what is this truth? What is this truth? Like Herod. Remember, Jesus stood in front of Pilate, and Pilate was asking whether he was a king and all of that. And he said, yes, and for this reason I was born into this world. Remember, he became flesh and blood to bear witness of the truth. And Pilate said, what is the truth? And you don't see that conversation continued after that. Okay, so, but now today we are continuing that conversation. What is the truth? I mean, John chapter 8 gave us the answer, but look at here. Look at we looked at chapter 18, those who suppress the truth. Verse 21, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fool. Listen, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. Forget about this. Let's read verse 25 and then come back here. Who exchanged the truth of God for the lie. Wow. Who exchanged the truth of God for the lie. So let me switch back again. Now we are talking about, thank God for colors. I'm going to use another color. Okay, so it says they exchanged. The word is also changed. Truth with the lie. Remember the lie. Okay, so I think you are not able to see this. So I'm going to move this up a little. Okay, so we're talking about a change or exchange, rather. They changed the truth of God with the lie. Okay, so this is a change, isn't it? And this is verse 25. I'm going to put 125 of Romans. But look at 123. Look at 123. We read it. I'm going to read it again. And they changed the glory. Okay, once again, the word change. This time, let me just move this a bit up. So verse 125. again exchange, but this time he says they changed the glory of the incorruptible God. I'm going to put here glory of God. They changed the glory of God with what? It says into an image made like corruptible man. I'm going to remove unnecessary words for the sake of today's teaching and say they changed the glory of God with image of man. With image of man. Wow. Okay. Now I can see the image of man is the lie that we have believed. Then what is the truth? It was the glory of God, which means this is who we are. Okay? The glory of God, which is the image of God. Okay, Christ came as the image of God. Remember, first of all, John chapter 1 says, the law was given to Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ, or the Christ. Who is the Christ? The glory of God. What does that mean? He is the image of God. He's the reflection of God. He shows us who the Father is. And this is how he puts an end, or he makes of no effect him who had the power of death, the lies. Okay? When he comes as the truth, and the revelation of him becomes the truth that we can see and believe, then we are being set free from the lies. He said, from now on, you are going to know the truth. Why? Because he said, there are many other things that I want to share with you, but you are not willing to, or you cannot bear them now. But I will send the Spirit of what? Truth. And he will take what is of mine, what was him, the image of God, and declare, make it known to you. For what purpose? To know who you are. Because 2 Corinthians chapter 3:18 says it's like a mirror story. You want to know who you are, you got to behold him. So as you behold him, he reflects who you are. You see him like a mirror. You see your own face in him, but you're really looking at him and you're looking at yourself. So the truth, the bondage that we had believed was that we are not in the house of the Father, that God is not our Father, that we are not sons, and therefore we are not heirs. And guess what? When you are not any of these things, you are going to make yourself a name. You're going to work to get something. And that's when all unrighteousness and all those things come in, which the nation of Israel is a perfect example of that. They show us what living by doing means. And I mean, Galatians chapter 3, Rose covered this a few sessions ago. As many as are under the law, they are under a curse. As many as are under the works of the law are under a curse. Why? Because it says that you're gonna live according to your doings, not according to who God is to you. You have become a source of life to yourself, and you have kind of cut yourself from basically God himself. Okay, I told you that this is a two-part teaching, and I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to leave the rest for next week, so please follow me. This is not done. We're going to look at this. This is more than one session. I try to do as much as I can in one session, but I don't want to also keep you long like the last 2-3 sessions. Please forgive me, by the way, for those things. I looked at the time after the recording and I realized it was like 40 minutes. And I know that after that there is basically a few points that Pastor Bill shares with you. And even after that, the discussions, and it can become a longer session. But I trust that you have been also blessed by the teachings and discussions as well. So blessings to you guys. Believe the truth and no lies. Forget them. There is a new day, and that day is the truth of God that is shining for you.